What if the history we know is less about cold, hard facts and more about, well, the stories we've chosen to believe?
That's a provocative thought to start with.
Today, we're plunging into the world of Herodotus, often called the father of history. We're exploring this captivating blend of narrative and inquiry.
It's a fascinating journey into how we started writing history.
Exactly. Think of this as your shortcut to understanding a really pivotal figure. And speaking of new ways to engage with texts, have you seen that YouTube channel, Mindful Moments?
I think I've heard of it. What do they do?
They use AI, actually, to analyze books, spark reflection, critical thinking. It's kind of similar to what we try to do here, digging into these sources.
Interesting. That critical thinking piece is definitely key with Herodotus,
Yeah.
especially when you compare him to someone like Homer.
Right. How does he stack up against Homer?
Well, first off, Herodotus writes in prose, not verse like Homer. That's a big shift.
Already signaling something different.
Kind of, yeah. A more investigative approach, maybe. But you still hear echoes of Homer. Certain phrases, the way he includes long speeches.
So he respects the tradition, but he's building on it.
Precisely. He's acknowledging it while charting a new course. He even directly questions Homer sometimes.
Like the whole Helen and Troy thing?
Exactly. Herodotus suggests, based on what he heard in Egypt, that Helen wasn't actually in Troy during the war. She was in Egypt.
Wow. And why did he think Homer got it wrong or changed it?
He basically says Homer knew the Egyptian version but rejected it because the Trojan story made for better epic poetry, better drama.
So story over, well, what Herodotus saw as accuracy, that's a major statement, isn't it? Questioning Homer.
It really is. It shows the beginnings of, historical criticism. Questioning sources, applying reason.
And he had this idea about recent history being more knowable.
Yes, he felt real knowledge came from the more recent past. And his emphasis on travel, gaining wisdom through seeing things firsthand. It's a bit like Odysseus, but Herodotus is actively correcting traditions, not just experiencing adventures.
So less myth, more inquiry.
Right. His opening line even distances him from epic poetry. He talks about the publication of his inquiry, not calling on a muse like Homer.
Okay, inquiry. And he dives into big ideas too, like custom versus nature.
Oh, absolutely. That was a huge debate back then, especially among the sophists. Is human behavior shaped by inherent nature or by societal norms, by nomos?
And Herodotus uses that story about Darius, right?
Yes, the one where Darius asks the Greeks how much money it would take for them to eat their dead fathers like the Cilician Indians did.
And they're horrified.
Completely horrified. Then he asks the Cilicians what it would take for them to burn their dead fathers, like the Greeks.
Equally horrified, I bet.
Exactly, which leads Herodotus to, quote, Pindar, custom is king of all.
Custom is king. That really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? How much of what feels natural to us is just custom?
It's a profound point. Herodotus seems to land on the side of custom being the dominant force. He even applies it to courage, suggesting Spartan bravery wasn't just innate, but heavily shaped by their laws and training.
Challenging the idea of universal human nature, in a way. But he wasn't pretending to know everything, was he? He admitted limits.
Definitely. He was quite upfront about the frayed edges of Greek knowledge. He'd point out stories he doubted, or where his own information stopped.
Like his trip up the Nile.
Perfect example. He says he went as far as Elephantine. Beyond that, he makes it clear he's relying on hearsay, on what others told him.
That honesty is quite modern in a sense, acknowledging the limits of your sources.
It is, and even when he recounts seemingly wild tales, like the supposed source of the Nile between those conical mountains, Crophi and Mofi.
The bottomless spring story.
Yeah, that one. He tells the story, but then adds he suspects the priest telling him was playing, basically joking or testing him, shows his critical filter was always on.
A reporter and an analyst rolled into one. Okay, let's talk Croesus. The rich king, the oracle, so on.
Ah, yes, the story of Croesus of Lydia. It's a cornerstone of Book 1. He asks the oracle at Delphi if he should attack Persia.
And gets that classic ambiguous answer.
You will destroy a great empire, which sounds great, until
the empire he destroys is his own. Ouch!
Big ouch! And he misinterprets other signs, too, like the prophecy about a mule ruling the Medes. He couldn't imagine that.
Because a mule is a hybrid, unnatural ruler.
Right. He missed that Cyrus the Great himself had mixed Persian and Median heritage. It shows the danger of hubris and misreading signs.
And the meeting with Solon. You mentioned it might be fictional.
Chronologically, yeah, Solon was likely dead before Croesus' reign reached its peak, but Herodotus uses it brilliantly.
And make a point about happiness?
Exactly. Solon tells Croesus you can't call anyone truly happy until you see how their life ends. Wealth and power are fleeting.
And Croesus only understands this when he's about to be burned on the pyre by Cyrus.
Right. He cries out Solon's name, realizing the truth of those words only in utter disaster. It's incredibly powerful, a lesson for the ages.
Truly is. Now, Herodotus doesn't just recount events. He tackles myths too, but sometimes tries to rationalize them.
He does. Especially early on, he presents the Persian view of the conflicts with the Greeks, starting with the tit-for-tat abductions, Io, Europa, Medea, Helen.
Kind of like historical grievances.
Sort of. He offers these more, let's say, human-level explanations for stories that were purely mythic before, trying to find a rational cause behind the legends.
Interesting. Okay, shifting gears a bit. What about Athens and Pisistratos?
Herodotus gives a pretty detailed account of how Pisistratos established his tyranny in Athens. It wasn't easy. He had a few attempts.
He mentions that clever plan to scatter his enemies.
Yeah, after one of his returns. And how he finally secured power the third time with mercenaries and solid financing. He wasn't just relying on popular support.
Real politic, even back then. Taking hostages, purifying Delos based on prophecies, calculated moves.
All presented as part of his strategy to consolidate power.
What about some of the specific customs he recorded? Sparta, Persia.
He gives us some fascinating glimpses. For Sparta, there's the story of Lichas finding the bones of Orestes at Tegea, fulfilling an oracle which helped Sparta gain the upper hand against Tegea.
A mix of archaeology and divine will, almost.
And the strange outcome of the battle over Thyrea with Argos, leading to Spartans growing their hair long and Argives cutting their short, customs born from conflict.
And the Persians. Very different vibe.
Very different. He describes their sacrifices, no altars, no fire, no libations in the Greek sense, just finding a clean spot, praying for the king and all Persians, cutting up the animal and boiling it.
Simple, almost.
And their social customs, the elaborate kissing rituals based on rank, how they esteemed neighbors based on proximity.
That proximity thing is interesting. The closer, the more esteemed.
Apparently so. And their religion, he notes they identified their main god, Oromostes, with the Greek Zeus, and their goddess Melita with Aphrodite. A kind of syncretism.
Trying to map their world onto the Greek one. What about the Ionians dealing with Cyrus?
Ah, that's a bit of a cautionary tale. After Cyrus conquered Lydia, the Ionians, except Miletus, offered to submit on the same terms they had under Croesus.
And Cyrus wasn't having it?
Nope. He told them that story about the flute player trying to charm fish out of the water after they refused to dance when he played. The fish only jumped out when he used a net. Meaning they missed their chance to join him willingly. Now they'd be compelled. So the Ionians fortified their cities and desperately sought help from Sparta.
A tough lesson. But Herodotus also highlights Greek successes, like the Phocian voyages.
Oh, yes. He praises the Phocians as the first Hellenes to make really long sea voyages. Not in bulky merchant ships, but in Pentaconter's warship.
Where did they go?
All the way to the Adriatic, Tyrrhenia, Italy, Iberia, Spain, and even Tartessos beyond the Pillars of Heracles.
Wow, and they made friends out there.
Big time. King Arganthonios of Tartessos loved them, ruled for ages, and even offered them land in his kingdom. When they refused, he gave them money to build strong walls for their own city back in Ionia, anticipating Persian threats.
Incredible story of early exploration and diplomacy. Now, shifting east again, Babylon. Herodotus seems impressed by their engineering.
He really was. He talks about Queen Nitocris building huge embankments to control the Euphrates and even constructing a bridge right through the city.
Pretty advanced stuff.
Definitely. And later, when Cyrus besieged Babylon, Herodotus notes how well prepared the Babylonians were, having stored years' worth of food.
So Cyrus had to get creative.
He did. Herodotus recounts how Cyrus diverted the entire river Ganges into channels to make it fordable for his army, supposedly as revenge for the river drowning one of his sacred horses. And he likely used a similar river diversion tactic for the Euphrates to actually enter Babylon.
Ingenious. And he was also amazed by Babylonian agriculture, right?
Absolutely blown away. He claims their grain yields, wheat and barley, were regularly 200-fold, sometimes even 300-fold. He almost apologizes for saying it, knowing Greeks wouldn't believe it.
But he insists it's true.
He does, though he notes they lacked trees like figs, grapes, and olives, relying instead on palm trees and sesame for oil.
Painting a picture of a land of incredible natural wealth. What about the lands further east, like near the Caspian?
He describes the river Araxes flowing into the Caspian Sea, which he correctly identifies as a huge inland sea, separate from the outer ocean that he believed surrounded the known world.
getting the geography right, mostly. And he tells that intense story about Cyrus's end against Tomyris.
Yes, Queen Tomyris of the Massagetae. After Cyrus tricks and kills her son using wine, she sends him that chilling warning about giving him his fill of blood.
Which she does, according to Herodotus, after defeating his army. A brutal end.
A very brutal end, highlighting the dangers of underestimating opponents and perhaps a critique of Persian indulgence, like their love of wine.
Okay, let's circle back to Egypt. He spent a lot of time on Egypt.
An entire book, Book 2. He was clearly fascinated. He discusses its geography, the Nile Delta, the question of where Libya ends and Asia begins.
And those explorers who went across the desert.
And Asamonean youths. A fantastic story. They supposedly traveled deep into Libya, across the desert, and were captured by small, black-skinned people, pygmies, perhaps living by a great river flowing east, possibly the Niger. It pushed the boundaries of the known world.
Incredible tales. And Egyptian religion.
Yeah.
So different from the Greeks.
Radically different in many ways. He describes their specific animal sacrifice rituals, like cursing the head of the bull. The regional variations are key, too. Some worship goats, others sheep, depending on their main temple.
And the animal reverence went deep. Mummified cats, sacred bulls.
Exactly. The Apis bull burial, the reverence for crocodiles, cats, ibis. He mentions sacred otters, eels, even a fox goose. And he recounts the myth of the phoenix, coming every 500 years to Heliopolis.
That phoenix myth is so enduring. And their burial customs. Mummification.
He gives a surprisingly detailed account of the different embalming methods, from the most expensive, involving removing the brain and organs, to cheaper methods using cedar oil or just purging the intestines.
Reflecting social strata even in death rituals.
Very much so. It shows a society deeply preoccupied with the afterlife and preserving the body.
And their food sources were interesting too, like the lotus.
Yes, he mentions them using the lotus that grew in the Nile floodwaters, drying it and making bread from it, and also eating certain edible roots, adapting to that unique river environment.
Resourceful. Now what about the rulers he discusses? Sesostris.
Sesostris is presented as a legendary conqueror based on Egyptian priest accounts. He supposedly campaigned by sea and land deep into Asia and Europe, leaving pillars to mark his conquests.
And those pillars had interesting additions sometimes.
Yes, Herodotus says if a nation fought bravely, the pillar just had text. If they surrendered easily, he added female genitalia to signify their lack of manliness. A bit crude, but direct.
Definitely direct. Okay, and the Helen in Egypt story, again, he really leans into that alternative version.
He does. He uses the Egyptian priest's account of Paris, Alexandros, being blown off course, and King Proteus detaining Helen. He even quotes Homer's Odyssey, where Menelaus mentions being in Egypt, as supporting evidence.
So he's using Greek sources to back up the Egyptian claim. Clever.
Very. And he criticizes other poems, like the Cypria, for contradicting Homer's timeline, which, in Herodotus's view, supported the Egyptian story. It's a fascinating piece of early historical debate.
Presenting multiple viewpoints, weighing evidence. It's really striking. It reminds me again of trying to get different perspectives like you see with some modern analysis tools like that Mindful Moments channel it aims to do with AI, or what we try to encourage here in our discussions. It's about not just accepting the first story you hear.
Absolutely. Critical engagement is key. Herodotus, in his own way, was doing that.
What about the pyramid builders he mentions? Cheops.
He paints Cheops, Khufu, as a tyrant who closed temples and used forced labor for the Great Pyramid. His successor, Shephren Khafre, supposedly followed suit.
But Mykerinos, Menkaure, was different.
Yes, Mykerinos is depicted more positively, reopening temples. But he gets a raw deal from an oracle predicting only 6 years left to rule. He tries to cheat fate by partying day and night, trying to turn 6 years into 12.
Doesn't work, I assume.
Doesn't work. It's another story about fate and the limits of human power.
And the blind king Anasis. And Sebokos the Ethiopian.
Anasis fled to the marshes when Sebokos invaded. Sebokos ruled justly for 50 years, apparently disliked executions, and used forced labor piling soil as punishment instead. Herodotus notes this actually raised the ground level of Egyptian towns.
An unintended consequence of clemency.
Exactly. Then there's the debate about the age of the gods.
Right. The Egyptians claimed much older origins for gods the Greeks thought were relatively young, like Heracles or Dionysus.
Yes, they claimed millennia of recorded history and precise calculations, contrasting sharply with Greek mythological timelines.
And Psammetichos, the oracle about the bronze cup.
A classic oracle story. 12 kings were ruling Egypt, and an oracle said whoever poured a libation from a bronze cup would rule alone. Psammetichos, one of the 12, forgot his gold cup and used his bronze helmet instead.
Oops. Or maybe
Yeah.
destiny.
The other kings saw it as fulfilling the oracle and exiled him to the marshes. But of course, he eventually came back and took sole power with help from Ionian and Caecarian mercenaries, the Bronze Men, predicted by another oracle.
Fate finds a way. What about that floating island?
Chemis. The island of Chemis near Buto. Said to float, housing a temple to Apollo. Of course, the Egyptians linked it to Leto hiding Apollo there from Typhon. Herodotus seems skeptical about the floating part, but relates the legend.
Always reporting, sometimes with a raised eyebrow. Okay, nearing the Persian era now. Amasis. How did he rise?
Amasis was a commoner who rose through the ranks. Herodotus tells that great story about the golden foot basin. Amasis melted it down, made a statue of a god, and people worshipped it.
And point was?
He told them, that statue is made from the basin you used to wash your feet and vomit in. I was like, that basin? A commoner, but now I'm your king, so give me respect. It apparently worked. Clever psychology.
Very clever. He sounds like quite the character. Made alliances with Greeks, too.
Yes, married a Greek woman from Cyrene, Laodice, and made generous offerings to Greek sanctuaries like Delphi, Samos, and Lindos, a skilled diplomat.
Until Cambyses came along.
Until Cambyses, son of Cyrus. Herodotus describes Cambyses' invasion preparations, getting water supplies arranged for the desert crossing with help from the king of Arabia.
Logistics are key, and Polycrates of Samos got involved.
Yes, Polycrates, the tyrant of Samos, sends Samians he suspected of plotting against him to join Cambyses' invasion force, basically hoping they'd get killed. Herodotus gives different accounts of what actually happened to them.
Politics and betrayal, constant themes. Now, Herodotus doesn't just cover wars and kings. He includes dramatic family stories, too, like Periandros of Corinth.
Right, the tragic story of Periandros and his son Lycophron. After Periandros killed his wife, Lycophron became estranged and lived in Corcyra. Periandros tried desperately to reconcile later in life, but the Corcyrians killed Lycophron to prevent Periandros from coming there. A grim tale.
Shows the personal side of these powerful figures.
Yeah.
Okay, the Persian succession after Cambyses gets complicated with the false Smerdis.
Very complicated. Cambyses had his actual brother Smerdis secretly killed because of a dream. Then, while Cambyses was away in Egypt, two Magi brothers staged a coup. One of them looked like Smerdis.
So everyone thought the real Smerdis was on the throne.
For a while, yes. The Magus Patazaethes put his brother, also named Smerdis, on the throne. This false Smerdis granted tax breaks and everyone was happy until Cambyses found out on his way back.
And Cambyses revealed the truth before he died.
Yes, Herodotus says he confessed to the Persian nobles that he'd had his brother killed and that the current king was an imposter. But then Cambyses died from an accidental wound.
Leaving chaos behind. How is the imposter discovered?
A nobleman named Otanus grew suspicious. He had a daughter who was one of the royal wives. He asked her to check if the king had ears because the Magus Smerdis had supposedly had his ears cut off as punishment years before.
Talk about palace intrigue.
She confirmed it, no ears. So Otanus gathered 6 other Persian nobles, including Darius, to plot against the Magi.
And Darius was the ambitious one.
Darius argued forcefully for immediate action rather than waiting or gathering more support. He persuaded them to storm the palace right away.
High risk, high reward.
Exactly. They managed to kill both Magi, the false Smerdis, and his brother Patazaethes, ending their short reign. Then, famously, Darius became king, supposedly because his horse neighed first at sunrise, aided by a clever groom.
History turning on strange events. Now, Herodotus includes some really outlandish stories, too, like the gold-digging ants in India.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Huge ants, bigger than foxes, that live in the desert and dig up gold dust when making their burrows. The Indians supposedly sneak in on camels to steal the gold dust while the ants are underground and have to make a quick getaway before the ants chase them.
Sounds completely mythical.
Almost certainly, but it reflects the distant, mysterious, and fabulously wealthy image that India held for the Greeks. He's reporting what was said about these far-off lands.
And Arabia had its own strange dangers. Winged serpents guarding frankincense.
According to Herodotus, yes. Gathering frankincense involved dealing with small, winged snakes, which they drove away with the smoke of styrax resin. Cassia was guarded by bats and cinnamon by large birds, making valuable spices hard to get.
Adding to their mystique and value. Even powerful figures meet sticky ends, like Polycrates.
Yes, Polycrates of Samos, despite his earlier success and alliance with Amasis, ignored warnings and sailed to meet the Persian satrap Overreach, who treacherously arrested and crucified him. A dramatic fall from power.
Another lesson in fortune's instability. Okay, one more really dramatic story. Zopyros in the siege of Babylon under Darius.
A truly extreme example of dedication or maybe fanaticism. Babylon was resisting Darius, so Zopyros, a Persian noble, came up with a plan.
What did he do?
He mutilated himself horribly, cut off his own nose and ears, shaved his head, whipped himself, and then pretended to desert to the Babylonians, claiming Darius had done this to him.
That's intense.
The Babylonians believed him and, impressed by his apparent hatred for Darius, gave him command of troops. Zopyros then deliberately let Persian forces win small skirmishes, killing Persians he'd prearranged to be expendable, further gaining Babylonian trust.
Building his credibility through sacrifice.
Exactly, until they trusted him completely and put him in charge of the city's defenses, at which point he opened the gates for Darius. An almost unbelievable act of self-sacrifice for the Persian cause.
Unbelievable is right. Okay, let's move north to the Scythians, a very different culture again.
Very different. Nomadic, living north of the Black Sea, Herodotus gives their own origin story involving golden objects falling from the sky and their divisions into different tribes like the royal Scythians, plowmen, nomads.
And their geography seemed vast and somewhat mysterious to the Greek.
Yes, Herodotus tries to map it out, describing major rivers like the Ister, Danube, and Borysthenes, Gainurper. He has this view of Asia as a huge peninsula, with Scythia forming part of its northern edge.
And the royal customs were quite elaborate, especially funerals.
Extremely. When a king died, there were elaborate mourning rituals, and a year later, 50 servants and 50 horses were killed and set up around the tomb as spectral guardians. Oaths were sworn by the royal hearth.
Grim stuff. What about the Black Sea itself?
He gives measurements for the Pontus, Black Sea, and the Maeotis, Sea of Azov, emphasizing their size and importance as major bodies of water known to the Greeks.
And Darius tried to conquer them.
He did. A massive expedition. Herodotus describes Mandracles of Samos building the bridge of boats across the Bosporus for Darius's army, and Darius setting up pillars to commemorate the crossing.
But the Scythians were elusive.
They refused direct battle. Their strategy was scorched earth and constant harassment, attacking Persian foragers but fading away before the main army. They led the Persians on a wild goose chase deep into their territory.
Smart tactics against a larger force. Did Darius listen to advice about his retreat?
He did, crucially. Cos of Lesbos advised him not to dismantle the bridge over the Ister, Danube, arguing he might need it for retreat. Darius initially dismissed it, but later realized its wisdom and rewarded Cos. That bridge saved his army.
A close call. Herodotus also includes that story about Scythians and Amazons.
Yes, a long tale explaining the origin of the Sarmatian people. Scythian youths encounter Amazons, they gradually intermingle, learn each other's languages, sort of, and eventually move away to form a new tribe where women retained Amazonian customs like hunting and fighting.
Blending myth and ethnography again. And the Scythian tactics. You mentioned harassment. Anything else?
They used the Persians' unfamiliarity with the terrain. Herodotus also mentions, amusingly, that the braying of Persian donkeys and mules constantly spooked the Scythian horses, which hadn't encountered them before.
Unexpected advantages. Okay, let's touch on Cyrene in North Africa. How did that Greek colony get started?
Through oracles, like so many things. Bathos from Thera was told by Delphi to found a colony in Libya. Initial attempts failed, plagued by drought and hardship on a small island.
So they went back to the oracle.
They did, and the oracle basically told them off for not actually going to mainland Libya. Eventually, guided by locals, they found the fertile spot where Cyrene was established and thrived.
Persistence pays off. But they had internal strife later.
Yes, Herodotus mentions later conflicts, like King Arcesilaus quarreling with his brothers, leading to more instability. Persia even got involved later, marching through Cyrene during a campaign.
Okay, brief detour to Macedonia. Any early origins mentioned?
There's the story of Persian envoys demanding earth and water, symbols of submission, from King Amyntas of Macedon. The Macedonians initially comply, but the envoys get drunk and insult the Macedonian women.
Okay.
Amyntas' son Alexander, not the Great, an ancestor, tricks the Persians, sends the women away, and has young men disguised as women kill the envoys. It's covered up, but shows early Macedonian assertion against Persia.
A dramatic, bloody start to their interactions. And Darius had encounters with other peoples in that region, like the Paeonians.
Yes, the charming story of the Paeonian woman. Darius saw her carrying water on her head, leading a horse, and spinning flax all at the same time. He was so impressed by her industry, he ordered the entire Paeonian tribe relocated to Asia Minor.
Relocated for being hardworking. That seems counterintuitive.
Herodotus presents it as Darius wanting such industrious people closer to him, maybe a forced migration disguised as an honor.
Strange motivations. And his general Megabezoos had warnings about a Greek, Histiaios.
Yes, Histiaios of Miletus had helped Darius during the Scythian campaign and was rewarded with land in Thrace. Megabezoos warned Darius it was dangerous to let a clever Greek establish a fortified city, Markinos, in such a strategic, resource-rich area.
Wise advice.
Darius took it, recalled Histiaios to Susa under the guise of making him a royal advisor, effectively keeping him under watch.
Clever move by Darius. Now back in Sparta, more complexities with their kings.
Always. King Anaxandridas had 2 wives because his first wife was childless. The ephors insisted he take a second wife to ensure an heir, but he refused to divorce the first. The second wife produced Cleomenes, but then the first wife surprisingly bore children, including Dorius. Created succession issues later.
Dynastic drama. And Cleomenes was an active king.
Very active, often controversial. He intervened in Athens to help expel the Pisistrated tyrants, but later clashed with Athenian democracy.
And elsewhere in Greece, Cleisthenes of Sicyon was making changes.
Yes, Cleisthenes, tyrant of Sicyon, famously renamed the tribes to diminish Dorian influence, and specifically targeted the hero Adrastos, who was revered in Orgos, Sicyon's rival. He promoted the Theban hero Melanippos instead, using religion and identity for political ends.
A common theme. And Corinth's tyranny under Kypselos, foretold by an oracle.
Absolutely. The oracle predicted Kypselos, from a non-Dorian family, would overthrow the ruling Bacchiad clan, which he did. Herodotus includes the oracle's verses.
Oracles driving events, or maybe just legitimizing them after the fact.
There you go.
Okay, fast forward to the Ionian Revolt. Cyprus got involved.
Yes, most of Cyprus joined the revolt against Persia, led by Onesilos of Salamis. Herodotus describes the big battle there, highlighting the duel between Onesilos and the Persian general Artabios, who rode a specially trained war horse.
A horse trained to fight.
Yes, to rear up and strike with its hooves. Onesilos' Cosarian shield-bearer cleverly cut the horse's legs out from under it, while Onesilos dealt with Artabios himself. Despite individual successes, the Persians eventually crushed the Cypriot rebellion.
And Persia then moved to reconquer the Ionian cities.
Ruthlessly. Led by Artaphernes and Otanes. Herodotus mentions Clazomena and Syme falling. He describes their brutal tactic for subjugating islands, forming a human chain across the island and literally netting the inhabitants.
Horrifying. What happened to Histiaios, the guy Darius kept in Susa?
Histiaios eventually persuaded Darius to let him go back to Ionia, claiming he'd quell the revolt he secretly helped incite. Once back, he played a complex game, trying to regain power in Miletus, fleeing to Chios, raising forces, essentially becoming a pirate chief fighting both Persians and Greeks at times.
A real schemer. Did it end well for him?
Not at all. He was eventually captured by the Persians and impaled by Artaphernes, despite Darius possibly wanting him spared.
A tangled web. Finally, one last bit of Spartan drama, King Demaratos' legitimacy.
Yes, his rival King Cleomenes spread rumors that Demaratos wasn't the true son of the previous king Ariston. Demaratos confronted his mother, asking her directly about his paternity.
What'd she say?
She told him a complex story about either King Ariston visiting her disguised as a hero, or the hero Astrabacos himself visiting her, leaving his paternity ambiguous but potentially semi-divine. It didn't save Demaratos. Cleomenes bribed the Delphic oracle to declare him illegitimate, forcing him into exile, where he eventually joined the Persians.
Wow. So much intrigue, so many stories. Herodotus really covered the known world.
He truly did, from grand battles and political schemes to bizarre customs and personal tragedies.
We've journeyed through this, incredibly rich and sometimes perplexing world documented by Herodotus. We've seen clashing cultures, ambitious rulers, maybe divine interventions, and that very human drive to understand the world around us.
His accounts, even when debated or fantastical, are just invaluable windows into the ancient mindset and the very beginnings of historical writing.
Absolutely. And the power of storytelling, how narratives shape our understanding that comes through so strongly. So just as platforms like Mindful Moments encourage critical engagement with texts, we really hope this exploration encourages you to revisit these narratives, question assumptions, maybe dig into the layers of meaning.
Consider how these ancient perspectives echo or clash with our modern views on history, culture, human nature itself.
Definitely. If you found this interesting, please subscribe and share this exploration with others who might enjoy it. We'll have links, including where you can find Herodotus' histories, in the show notes.
And most importantly, keep thinking critically.
Keep questioning the stories that shape our world.